Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the aircraft carrier's deck, watching the sunrise paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and orange. The salty breeze whipped through her short brown hair as she checked her dive gear one final time. At 28 years old, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled Navy SEALs in her unit, but today felt different. Today, she would face a challenge that would test everything she had learned over the past 8 years of military service. The mission briefing had been classified at the highest levels. A Chinese submarine had been detected near the Spratly Islands, carrying what intelligence suggested were advanced missile components destined for a hostile nation. The submarine had gone dark 3 days ago, disappearing into the deep waters near an underwater canyon system. Traditional sonar couldn't penetrate the rocky formations, and satellite imagery was useless beneath the waves. They needed someone who could dive deep, navigate treacherous underwater terrain, and gather intelligence without being detected. Sarah had volunteered immediately when Admiral Harrison presented the mission to her SEAL team. Her colleagues, all experienced operators, had exchanged worried glances. The dive would require descending to depths that pushed the limits of human endurance, even with the most advanced equipment. The underwater canyon was known for its unpredictable currents and jagged rock formations that had claimed several submarines over the decades. "Mitchell, you sure about this?" her teammate Rodriguez had asked after the briefing. "That depth, it's not just about the pressure. The nitrogen narcosis at that level can mess with your head. You might not think straight down there." Sarah had simply nodded, her green eyes focused and determined. "Someone has to do it, and I've trained for situations exactly like this. Besides, I've done deeper dives during our Arctic training exercises." What Rodriguez and the others didn't know was that Sarah had grown up diving in the cold, dangerous waters off the coast of Alaska. Her father, a commercial fisherman, had taught her to dive for sea urchins and abalone when she was just 12 years old. By the time she was 16, she could hold her breath for over 4 minutes and dive to depths that amazed even experienced divers. Those early experiences had given her an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, both literally and figuratively. The mission parameters were straightforward but dangerous. Sarah would be inserted by submarine approximately 2 miles from the target area. She would then use a specialized underwater propulsion device to navigate through the canyon system, locate the Chinese submarine, and plan a series of microtransmitters that would allow the Navy to track its movements. The transmitters were so small they would be virtually undetectable, but they needed to be placed with precision on specific parts of the submarine's hull. As Sarah made her final preparations, she couldn't help but think about the conversation she'd had with her mother the night before. Her mom had called, as she did every week, asking about her work. Sarah always kept the details vague, describing her job as underwater engineering or marine research. Her mother, a high school teacher in their small Alaskan hometown, had no idea that her daughter regularly undertook missions that appeared in classified Pentagon briefings. "Be careful out there, sweetheart," her mother had said, her voice carrying the worry that only a parent could feel. "I know you can't tell me what you're doing, but I have this feeling. Just promise me you'll come home safe." Sarah had promised, as she always did, but this time the words felt heavier. She had an unusual feeling about this mission, a sense that it would change everything. She couldn't explain it, but her instincts had kept her alive through numerous dangerous operations, and she had learned to trust them. The submarine USS Nimrod had been her home for the past 3 days as they traveled to the insertion point. The crew treated her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Female SEALs were rare, and one with her level of expertise was almost unheard of. She had overheard some of the younger sailors whispering about her, wondering if she was really as skilled as the officers claimed. Sarah didn't mind the skepticism. She preferred to let her actions speak for themselves. Captain Williams, the submarine's commanding officer, had been briefed on Sarah's background and capabilities. During their journey to the target area, he had shared stories of other special operations he had supported over his 25-year career. "I've worked with a lot of SEALs," he told Sarah over coffee in the mess hall. "But I've never met one with your combination of technical skills and diving expertise. The Admiral wasn't exaggerating when he said you were the best person for this job. The technical aspects of the mission were as challenging as the physical demands. The microtransmitters Sarah would be placing were cutting-edge technology developed by a joint team of Navy engineers and civilian contractors. Each device was no larger than a quarter, but contained sophisticated electronics that could transmit data through hundreds of feet of seawater. The transmitters would attach to the submarine's hull using a molecular bonding agent that would make them virtually impossible to remove without specialized equipment. Sarah had spent weeks training with the devices, learning to activate and place them while wearing thick diving gloves in complete darkness. The training had taken place in a massive underwater facility in San Diego, where a mock submarine hull had been constructed for practice purposes. She had repeated the placement procedure hundreds of times until she could do it perfectly while dealing with strong artificial currents and limited visibility. The psychological preparation had been just as important as the technical training. Navy psychologists had worked with Sarah to prepare her for the mental challenges of a deep dive. At the depths she would be operating, nitrogen narcosis could cause hallucinations, confusion, and impaired judgment. The condition was sometimes called rapture of the deep because it could create a false sense of euphoria that led divers to make fatal mistakes. The key is to stay focused on your mission parameters, Dr. Jensen, the Navy's lead diving psychologist, had explained. Your training and muscle memory will help you function even if your conscious mind becomes affected. Trust your procedures, trust your equipment, and don't let the narcosis convince you to deviate from the plan. As the Nimrod approached the insertion point, Sarah reviewed her mission checklist one final time. She would have 6 hours to locate the Chinese submarine, place the transmitters, and return to the pickup point. If she wasn't back within that time frame, the Nimrod would have to leave without her to avoid detection. The margin for error was essentially zero. The diving equipment Sarah would use represented the pinnacle of military technology. Her rebreather system would recycle her exhaled air, removing carbon dioxide and adding oxygen as needed. This would eliminate the telltale stream of bubbles that traditional scuba gear produced, making her virtually invisible to sonar detection. The system could support her for up to 8 hours, but the physical demands of the mission meant she would likely need to surface well before that limit. Her diving suit was a custom-fitted dry suit designed to protect her from near-freezing water temperatures at depth. The suit incorporated heating elements powered by a small battery pack, along with multiple layers of insulation. Despite these precautions, she knew that the cold would be a constant challenge throughout the mission. The underwater propulsion device, nicknamed the torpedo by the SEALs who used it, would allow Sarah to cover long distances underwater without exhausting herself. The device looked like a small torpedo with handles and could pull a diver through the water at speeds up to 8 knots. It was powered by a lithium-ion battery pack and could operate for up to 4 hours on a single charge. Navigation in the deep ocean presented unique challenges. Sarah would be using a combination of an inertial navigation system and acoustic beacons to find her way through the underwater canyon. The inertial system would track her position by monitoring her movements, while the acoustic beacons would provide reference points throughout her route. Both systems have been tested extensively, but the rocky terrain of the canyon could interfere with the acoustic signals. As the final hour before insertion approached, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. Growing up in Alaska, she had never imagined she would one day be preparing for a classified military mission in the South China Sea. Her original plan had been to study marine biology and perhaps work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It was only during her junior year of college that a Navy recruiter had explained the opportunities available for someone with her unique skills and background. The decision to join the Navy had surprised everyone who knew her, including Sarah herself. She had always been more comfortable underwater than on land, more at peace in the vast silence of the deep than in crowded social situations. The recruiter had recognized something in her that even she hadn't fully understood at the time. The rare combination of physical capability, mental toughness, and technical aptitude that made an exceptional special operations warrior. SEAL training had been the most challenging experience of her life. The physical demands had pushed her to her absolute limits, but the mental challenges had been even more difficult. Learning to function effectively as part of a team while maintaining the independence of thought necessary for special operations required a delicate balance. Many highly capable individuals failed not because they lacked physical strength or technical skills, but because they couldn't adapt to the unique culture and demands of the SEAL community. Sarah had not only survived the training, but excelled at it. Her instructors had noted her unusual ability to remain calm under extreme stress and her natural leadership qualities. More importantly, they had recognized her exceptional diving capabilities and had recommended her for advanced underwater operations training. The advanced training had introduced Sarah to missions and equipment that most people could never imagine. She had learned to use submarines as insertion platforms, to navigate underwater obstacle courses in complete darkness, and to operate sophisticated technical equipment while dealing with the disorienting effects of nitrogen narcosis. The training had taken place at locations around the world, from the Arctic Ocean to tropical coral reefs. One particular training exercise had prepared Sarah specifically for missions like the one she was about to undertake. The exercise had required her to dive to extreme depths in the Gulf of Mexico, locate a simulated enemy installation on the ocean floor, and gather intelligence without being detected. The dive had lasted over 5 hours and had pushed both her equipment and her physical capabilities to their limits. It was during that exercise that her instructors had realized they were working with someone truly exceptional. As Captain Williams announced over the submarine's intercom that they had reached the insertion point, Sarah felt the familiar mix of anticipation and calm that preceded every major mission. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing was controlled, and her mind was focused entirely on the task ahead. This was what she had trained for, what she had been born to do. The next few hours would test everything she had learned over the years. Success would provide crucial intelligence that could prevent an international incident. Failure might mean not just the loss of valuable information, but potentially the start of a larger conflict. As Sarah made her way to the submarine's torpedo room for final preparations, she carried the weight of those possibilities with the same calm confidence that had characterized her entire military career. The water was darker and colder than Sarah had expected as she descended through the canyon's entrance. Her depth gauge showed 180 feet, and climbing steadily as she followed the rocky walls deeper into the underwater maze. The propulsion device hummed quietly, pulling her through the water at a steady pace while she maintained perfect buoyancy control. Above her, the faint glow of sunlight had long since disappeared, replaced by the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. Sarah's headlamp cut through the water, illuminating strange rock formations and occasional schools of deep-sea fish that seemed curious about her presence. The canyon walls rose on either side of her like the walls of a cathedral, covered in colorful marine growth that had never seen sunlight. Despite the beauty of the underwater landscape, she remained focused on her navigation display and the mission ahead. At 250 feet, she encountered the first challenge. A strong current swept through the canyon from the east, threatening to push her off course. Sarah adjusted her position and increased power to the propulsion device, using the rocky walls as reference points to maintain her heading. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, but she could feel the first subtle effects of nitrogen narcosis beginning to influence her perception. Colors seemed slightly more vivid, and she had to consciously resist the urge to slow down and admire the underwater scenery. The navigation system indicated she was approaching the area where the Chinese submarine had last been detected. Sarah reduced her speed and began a systematic search pattern, using her sonar detector to scan for metallic objects hidden among the rocks. The canyon floor was littered with debris from decades of maritime activity. Old anchors, pieces of shipwrecks, and even what appeared to be parts of aircraft that had crashed into the ocean years ago. After 30 minutes of searching, Sarah's detector registered a large metallic signature approximately 100 yards to the north. She adjusted her course and approached cautiously, her heart rate increasing slightly despite her training. As she rounded a massive boulder, the outline of a submarine gradually became visible in the beam of her headlamp. The vessel was larger than she had expected, easily 300 feet long and painted in the dark gray typical of military submarines. The submarine was resting on the canyon floor at a depth of 320 feet, partially hidden beneath an overhang of rock. Sarah could see lights glowing through several portholes, indicating that the vessel was still active and inhabited. She approached from below, using the submarine's own shadow to conceal her presence. Her training had taught her that most submarine crews wouldn't expect threats to approach from directly underneath their vessel. As Sarah moved closer to the submarine's hull, she could hear the faint sound of machinery operating inside. The vessel's engines were running at minimal power, just enough to operate life support systems and essential equipment. She positioned herself near the submarine's stern, where the propeller and rudder assembly would provide good locations for the transmitters. The first transmitter placement went smoothly. Sarah activated the device using a small control unit attached to her wrist, then pressed it against the submarine's propeller shaft. The molecular bonding agent activated instantly, creating a bond so strong that the transmitter became essentially part of the submarine's structure. The device was small enough that it would be virtually impossible to detect during routine maintenance. Moving forward along the submarine's hull, Sarah searched for the optimal location for the second transmitter. Her mission briefing had specified that the devices should be placed to provide maximum coverage of the submarine's communication and navigation systems. She found the perfect spot near the submarine's sail, where multiple cables and antenna systems were housed. As she prepared to place the second transmitter, Sarah heard a sound that made her freeze in the water. The submarine's ballast tanks were venting, indicating that the vessel was preparing to change depth or position. She pressed herself against the hull and waited, hoping that the crew wasn't planning to surface immediately. After several tense minutes, the venting stopped and the submarine remained stationary. The second transmitter was more challenging to place due to its location near the submarine's control surfaces. Sarah had to maneuver carefully to avoid the submarine's diving planes while positioning the device correctly. The work required her to remove her diving gloves temporarily, exposing her hands to the near-freezing water. Despite the cold, she managed to activate and place the transmitter successfully. The third transmitter needed to be placed on the submarine's forward torpedo room, where it could monitor the vessel's weapons systems. Sarah swam forward along the hull, using her hands to feel her way in areas where her headlamp couldn't provide adequate illumination. The submarine's hull was covered in a thin layer of marine growth, making it slippery and difficult to maintain a grip. As Sarah worked on placing the third transmitter, she noticed movement in the water above her. A school of large tuna had been attracted by her lights and was circling curiously overhead. The fish weren't a direct threat, but their presence could potentially alert the submarine's crew if they were monitoring sonar. Sarah dimmed her lights and remained motionless until the fish lost interest and swam away. The fourth transmitter was designated for placement on the submarine's communications mast, which extended upward from the vessel's sail. Reaching this location required Sarah to swim directly above the submarine's control room, where any sound or vibration could potentially be detected by the crew inside. She moved with extreme caution, using only the minimum amount of propulsion necessary to maintain position. As she worked on the communications mast, Sarah could hear voices from inside the submarine. The sound was muffled by the water and the hull, but she could tell that the crew was engaged in some kind of technical discussion. Her Chinese language training allowed her to pick out a few words related to navigation and depth control. It seemed that the crew was planning to move the submarine soon, which meant she needed to complete her mission quickly. The fourth transmitter proved to be the most difficult to place. The communications mast was covered with sensitive equipment that Sarah had to avoid damaging while positioning the device. The work required her to use both hands while maintaining perfect buoyancy control with only her fins and breathing. After several tense minutes, she successfully attached the transmitter to the base of the mast, where it would be hidden among the other equipment. The final transmitter needed to be placed on the submarine's sonar dome, located in the bow section. This was perhaps the most critical placement, as it would allow the Navy to monitor the submarine's detection capabilities. Sarah swam forward to the submarine's nose, where the large sonar array was housed behind a protective dome. As she approached the sonar dome, Sarah realized that the submarine crew had detected something unusual. She could hear increased activity from inside the vessel, and several external lights had been activated. The crew wasn't necessarily aware of her presence, but they were clearly on alert. Sarah knew she had only minutes to complete the final placement and escape the area. Working quickly but carefully, Sarah activated the final transmitter and positioned it on the edge of the sonar dome where it would be invisible to casual inspection. The molecular bonding agent worked perfectly, securing the device to the submarine's hull. As soon as the transmitter was in place, Sarah began her withdrawal from the area. The return journey through the canyon was more challenging than the approach. Sarah was tired from the precision work required for the transmitter placements, and the effects of nitrogen narcosis were becoming more pronounced at the extreme depth. She had to consciously focus on her navigation display to avoid becoming disoriented in the maze of rocky formations. As she ascended through the canyon, Sarah encountered a new challenge. A group of sharks had moved into the area, attracted by some disturbance in the water. The sharks weren't necessarily aggressive, but their presence added another variable to an already complex situation. Sarah maintained her course and speed, knowing that sudden movements could provoke an unwanted response from the marine predators. The sharks followed her for several minutes as she made her way through the canyon's upper reaches. Sarah kept her movements smooth and predictable, avoiding the erratic behavior that might trigger a feeding response. Eventually, the sharks lost interest and disappeared back into the depths, leaving Sarah alone with the sound of her own controlled breathing. As she reached the 200-foot depth mark, Sarah began to feel the pressure reducing on her body and equipment. The nitrogen narcosis started to clear, and her thinking became sharper and more focused. She was ahead of schedule despite the challenges she had encountered, which meant she would have time to conduct a brief reconnaissance of the surrounding area before heading to the pickup point. The reconnaissance revealed several interesting details about the submarine's position and activities. The vessel was clearly engaged in some kind of long-term monitoring operation, rather than simply transiting through the area. Sarah observed several pieces of equipment that had been deployed on the canyon floor, suggesting that the crew was conducting scientific or intelligence-gathering work of their own. Sarah also noticed that the submarine had been modified with additional external equipment that wasn't standard for its class. These modifications suggested that the vessel was being used for specialized missions that went beyond normal submarine operations. The information would be valuable for intelligence analysts trying to understand the submarine's capabilities and mission. As Sarah made her way to the pickup point, she reflected on the successful completion of her mission. All 5 transmitters had been placed successfully, and she had gathered additional intelligence about the submarine's activities and modifications. The information would provide the Navy with unprecedented insight into Chinese submarine operations in the region. The pickup went smoothly, with the USS Nimrod appearing exactly on schedule at the predetermined location. Sarah was recovered quickly and efficiently, her mission complete without detection by the Chinese submarine crew. As she was helped aboard the American submarine, she felt the satisfaction that came with a difficult mission executed perfectly. Captain Williams greeted Sarah personally as she was brought aboard. "Mission successful?" he asked, his expression reflecting both hope and concern. Sarah nodded, too tired to speak immediately, but conveying through her expression that everything had gone according to plan. She would provide a detailed debrief later, but for now, she was content to know that she had succeeded in one of the most challenging missions of her career. The return journey to base would take several days, giving Sarah time to recover from the physical and mental stress of the deep dive. She knew that the intelligence she had gathered would be analyzed by teams of specialists, and that her mission might have prevented a larger conflict from developing in the region. 3 weeks after her successful submarine mission, Sarah found herself in an entirely different environment. The Pentagon's corridors bustled with activity as military personnel and civilian contractors hurried between meetings that would shape national security policy. Sarah walked steadily through the maze of hallways, her dress blues impeccable and her bearing confident despite the unusual nature of her summons to the nation's military headquarters. The message had arrived while Sarah was conducting routine training exercises with her SEAL team in Virginia Beach. Admiral Harrison himself had called, requesting her immediate presence in Washington for what he described as a critical briefing regarding your recent operational success. Sarah had never been summoned to the Pentagon before, and the mysterious nature of the request had her curious about what intelligence her submarine mission had produced. Sarah's commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, had accompanied her to Washington. During the flight from Norfolk, he had shared what little information he had about the purpose of their meeting. The intelligence from your transmitters has apparently produced some significant results, he explained. I don't have the details, but Admiral Harrison mentioned that your mission may have prevented a major international incident. The Pentagon security procedures were more thorough than anything Sarah had experienced, even during her highest-level training exercises. Multiple checkpoints, biometric scanners, and personal escorts were required to reach the classified briefing rooms in the building's most secure sections. Sarah found herself impressed by the sheer scale and complexity of the military's administrative headquarters. Their destination was a briefing room deep within the Pentagon's intelligence section. As they approached the room, Sarah noticed an unusual level of security, even by Pentagon standards. Armed guards flanked the door, and additional security personnel were stationed throughout the corridor. The level of protection suggested that whatever had been discovered was considered extremely sensitive. Admiral Harrison met them at the door to the briefing room, his expression serious but pleased. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, your mission results have exceeded our most optimistic expectations, he said as he shook her hand. What you're about to see is classified at the highest levels. The intelligence you gathered has revealed something that could fundamentally change our understanding of Chinese submarine capabilities. Inside the briefing room, Sarah was introduced to a group of individuals she hadn't expected to meet. Along with several high-ranking Navy officers, the group included representatives from the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. The presence of so many senior intelligence officials suggested that her mission had uncovered something far more significant than routine submarine monitoring. The briefing began with a detailed analysis of the transmitter data. Dr. Patricia Chun, a civilian intelligence analyst, explained how the devices had functioned perfectly, providing continuous streams of information about the Chinese submarine's activities, communications, and technical capabilities. The data had revealed that the submarine wasn't simply conducting routine patrols, but was actually testing advanced underwater communication systems that could revolutionize submarine warfare. The submarine you found, Dr. Chen explained, was serving as a test platform for quantum communication technology. This technology would allow submarines to communicate instantly with their command structure while remaining completely undetectable by traditional monitoring systems. If the Chinese had successfully developed this capability, it would have given them a decisive advantage in underwater warfare. Sarah listened intently as the briefing continued. The quantum communication system represented a technological breakthrough that defense experts had thought was still years away from practical implementation. The Chinese had apparently made significant advances in secret, developing a system that could maintain quantum entanglement between particles separated by hundreds of miles underwater. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Submarines equipped with quantum communication systems would be virtually impossible to track or intercept. They could coordinate complex operations across vast distances without revealing their positions, making them nearly invulnerable to detection and attack. The technology would have fundamentally shifted the balance of naval power in favor of whichever nation possessed it. Colonel James Wright from the Defense Intelligence Agency took over the briefing to explain the broader strategic implications. Based on the intelligence Lieutenant Commander Mitchell gathered, we've determined that the Chinese were approximately 6 months away from deploying this technology on their entire submarine fleet. Her mission not only provided us with detailed information about their capabilities, but also allowed us to develop countermeasures. The countermeasures development had been a massive undertaking involving scientists and engineers from across the defense establishment. The transmitter data had provided enough technical details about the quantum communication system to allow American researchers to understand its fundamental principles and identify potential vulnerabilities. Within 3 weeks of receiving the intelligence, American teams had developed jamming systems that could disrupt quantum entanglement and render the Chinese technology ineffective. Admiral Harrison returned to the podium to explain the current status of the situation. The Chinese have apparently realized that their quantum communication system has been compromised. Our sources indicate that they've suspended the testing program and recalled all submarines equipped with the experimental technology. They're essentially back to square one, while we've gained a significant technological advantage. Sarah began to understand why her mission was being treated as so significant. She had not only gathered crucial intelligence, but had potentially prevented a dramatic shift in global naval power. The success of her operation had given the United States time to develop appropriate responses to the new technology and maintain its strategic advantages in underwater warfare. The briefing continued with a discussion of how the intelligence was being used to enhance American submarine capabilities. The technical details of the Chinese quantum communication system had provided insights that were being applied to improve U.S. Navy communications and detection systems. In effect, Sarah's mission had not only neutralized a potential threat, but had also advanced American technological capabilities. Dr. Chun presented a detailed timeline showing how quickly the situation had developed after Sarah's mission. Within 48 hours of receiving the first transmitter data, analysts had recognized the significance of what they were seeing. Emergency research teams had been assembled, and resources had been redirected from other projects to focus on understanding and countering the quantum communication technology. The speed and scale of the response demonstrated the critical importance of timely intelligence gathering. Without the detailed technical data that Sarah's transmitters had provided, American analysts might not have discovered the Chinese quantum communication program until it was too late to develop effective countermeasures. The element of surprise that the technology would have provided could have been devastating in a potential conflict. Colonel Wright discussed the broader implications for future naval operations. The Chinese quantum communication program represents a new phase in underwater warfare technology. We're now in an arms race involving quantum physics, advanced materials science, and computer systems that most people can't even imagine. Operations like Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's will be crucial for maintaining our technological edge. Sarah was struck by the realization that her individual mission had influenced the course of a technological competition between superpowers. The precision work she had performed in the dark waters of the South China Sea had triggered a cascade of events involving thousands of researchers, billions of dollars in defense spending, and strategic decisions at the highest levels of government. The briefing concluded with a discussion of future operations that might be required to monitor Chinese submarine technology development. Admiral Harrison explained that Sarah's success had established her as one of the Navy's premier underwater intelligence specialists, and that she would likely be called upon for similar missions in the future. The Chinese won't abandon their quantum communication research, Admiral Harrison explained. They'll try to develop new approaches that are more secure and harder to detect. We'll need operators with your skills and experience to stay ahead of their technological advances. As the formal briefing ended, several of the intelligence officials approached Sarah individually to thank her for her service and discuss specific aspects of her mission. Dr. Chen was particularly interested in Sarah's observations about the submarine's modifications and equipment, which had provided crucial context for understanding the quantum communication system's requirements. The Central Intelligence Agency representative, who had introduced himself only as Mr. Thompson, discussed the broader intelligence picture that Sarah's mission had helped illuminate. The Chinese submarine program was apparently part of a larger technological development effort that included advanced artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, and space-based communication systems. Sarah found herself somewhat overwhelmed by the scope of the strategic competition that her mission had revealed. What had seemed like a relatively straightforward intelligence-gathering operation had turned out to be a crucial element in a technological rivalry that would shape global security for decades to come. As the day progressed, Sarah participated in several smaller briefings with specific technical teams. Engineers wanted to understand the exact conditions under which she had observed the submarine's equipment operating. Communications specialists were interested in the signals intelligence she had gathered while placing the transmitters. Even psychologists wanted to discuss her mental state and decision-making processes during the deep dive. The attention was flattering, but also somewhat uncomfortable for Sarah, who was accustomed to operating as part of a team rather than as an individual hero. She repeatedly emphasized that her mission success had depended on the support of her entire SEAL unit, the submarine crew that had transported her, and the technical specialist who had developed the transmitters and other equipment she had used. Admiral Harrison seemed to understand Sarah's discomfort with the individual attention. During a private conversation, he explained that recognition for special operations personnel was often delayed or classified, but that her contribution to national security would not be forgotten. He also hinted that even greater challenges and opportunities might be ahead for someone with her unique combination of skills and experience. As the day at the Pentagon drew to a close, Sarah reflected on how much her understanding of her role had changed. What had begun as a career focused on small unit tactics and direct action operations had evolved into something much larger and more complex. She was now part of a technological intelligence effort that operated at the intersection of advanced science, international relations, and national security strategy. The flight back to Norfolk gave Sarah time to process everything she had learned during the briefing. The quantum communication technology, the strategic implications, and the ongoing technological competition between nations represented challenges that she had never anticipated when she first decided to join the Navy. Her role was evolving beyond that of a traditional SEAL operator into something that required not just physical courage and technical skills, but also an understanding of broader strategic and technological trends. 6 months after the Pentagon briefing, Sarah found herself in a very different kind of meeting room. The Joint Chiefs of Staff conference room was an imposing space with its long mahogany table, formal portraits of military leaders, and an atmosphere that spoke of decisions that shaped world history. Sarah sat at the far end of the table, still somewhat surprised to find herself in such distinguished company. The meeting had been called to address a new crisis in the South China Sea. Satellite imagery had revealed that the Chinese were constructing an underwater installation near the same area where Sarah had conducted her submarine mission. The installation appeared to be a permanent research facility, possibly designed to develop and test the quantum communication technology that her mission had compromised months earlier. Admiral Harrison had specifically requested Sarah's presence at the meeting, explaining that her unique experience and knowledge of Chinese submarine operations made her input invaluable. Around the table sat the most senior military leaders in the country, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the chief of naval operations, and representatives from all major branches of the armed forces. General Patricia Coleman, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, opened the meeting with a frank assessment of the strategic situation. The Chinese installation represents a direct challenge to our naval dominance in the Pacific. If they succeed in developing operational quantum communication technology, they could effectively neutralize our submarine fleet's advantages. We need options for addressing this threat. The briefing materials laid out a complex situation. The underwater installation was being constructed in international waters, making direct military action difficult to justify. However, the facility's purpose was clearly military in nature, designed to support submarine operations that could threaten American interests throughout the Pacific region. The installation was also heavily defended, with surface ships, submarines, and even aircraft providing security. Sarah listened carefully as various military leaders presented options for addressing the installation. The Air Force proposed long-range bombing missions, but the underwater location made such attacks ineffective. The Army suggested joint operations with regional allies, but the installation's oceanic location put it beyond the reach of ground forces. Even the Marine Corps struggled to identify viable approaches to an underwater target. When the Navy's turn came to present options, Admiral Harrison surprised everyone by turning to Sarah. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has more direct experience with Chinese underwater operations than anyone else in this room. I believe her insights could be valuable for understanding our options. Sarah felt every pair of eyes in the room focus on her as she stood to address the assembled military leadership. Her heart rate increased slightly, but her voice remained steady as she began to speak. Thank you, Admiral. Based on my observations during the submarine mission, I believe the Chinese installation has several vulnerabilities that haven't been discussed. She moved to the large display screen at the front of the room and began pointing out details in the satellite images that others had missed. The installation appears to be dependent on a series of underwater cables for power and communication. These cables follow predictable routes along the ocean floor, avoiding major geological features. A small team could potentially access these cables and either gather intelligence or disable the facility's operations. The room erupted in quiet discussion as the senior officers considered Sarah's observations. General Coleman raised her hand for silence and asked Sarah to continue. What kind of team would be required for such an operation? And what would be the risks involved? Sarah had clearly given this question considerable thought. A modified SEAL team with specialized underwater demolition training could access the cables. The operation would require extended underwater operations at significant depth, similar to my previous mission, but with additional technical requirements. The main risks would be detection by the facility's security systems and the challenging underwater environment. Admiral Harrison stood up and moved to the display screen. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's analysis aligns with our technical assessment of the installation. The Chinese have focused their security efforts on preventing surface and aerial attacks, but underwater approaches remain vulnerable. A mission targeting the power and communication infrastructure could be highly effective. The discussion that followed revealed the complexity of planning such an operation. The installation was located over 400 miles from the nearest friendly territory, requiring submarine insertion and recovery. The depth of the target cables would push the limits of human diving capabilities, even with the most advanced equipment. The mission would also need to be conducted without triggering an international incident that could escalate into broader conflict. General Coleman asked Sarah directly about her assessment of mission feasibility. Lieutenant Commander, based on your experience, do you believe such an operation could be conducted successfully? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Yes, ma'am. The technical challenges are significant, but they're within the capabilities of a properly equipped and trained team. The key factors would be precise intelligence about the cable locations and timing the operation to avoid the facility's security patrols. Her confident response seemed to shift the mood in the room. The military leaders began discussing specific operational details rather than whether such a mission was possible. Sarah found herself answering technical questions about underwater navigation, demolition techniques, and equipment requirements that would be needed for the operation. Colonel Martinez from the Marine Corps raised an important concern. Even if we could successfully disable the installation, wouldn't the Chinese simply rebuild it with better security measures? Are we just delaying the inevitable development of their quantum communication capability? Sarah had anticipated this question and had given it considerable thought. Disabling the installation would certainly be temporary, but it would also provide opportunities for longer-term solutions. The repair and reconstruction process would give us time to gather intelligence about their technology and develop more effective countermeasures. It could also demonstrate our capability to threaten similar installations in the future, potentially deterring their construction. Admiral Harrison added his support to Sarah's analysis. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell makes an excellent point. The strategic value of such an operation extends beyond the immediate tactical effects. It would send a clear message about our ability to project power, even into heavily defended areas. The meeting continued for several more hours as the military leaders explored various aspects of the proposed operation. Sarah found herself increasingly involved in the detailed planning discussions, offering insights about underwater operations that even senior naval officers lacked. Her unique combination of tactical experience and recent intelligence about Chinese submarine capabilities made her perspective valuable. As the formal meeting concluded, General Coleman asked Sarah to remain behind for a private discussion. The other military leaders filed out of the conference room, leaving Sarah alone with the highest-ranking military officer in the country. Lieutenant Commander, I want you to understand the significance of what we've discussed today, General Coleman said as they sat at the now-empty conference table. The operation you described could be one of the most important military missions of the next decade. Success could preserve American naval dominance for years to come. Failure could have strategic consequences that extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Sarah nodded, fully aware of the weight of responsibility that such a mission would entail. I understand, ma'am. The strategic implications are clear, and I'm prepared to contribute however I can to the mission's success. General Coleman studied Sarah's expression carefully before continuing. I'm not just talking about your technical contribution to the mission planning. Based on your performance during the submarine intelligence mission and your analysis today, you're clearly the most qualified person to lead such an operation. Admiral Harrison has recommended you for mission command, and I'm inclined to support that recommendation. The prospect of commanding such a critical mission was both exciting and intimidating for Sarah. Leading a team into the most heavily defended Chinese installation in the Pacific would represent the pinnacle of special operations challenges. The technical demands alone would require capabilities that push the limits of current technology and human performance. What would be the timeline for such an operation? Sarah asked, her mind already racing through the planning and preparation requirements. That depends on several factors, including intelligence gathering and team preparation, General Coleman replied. We're looking at a minimum of 3 months for mission planning and training, possibly longer if we need to develop specialized equipment. The operation itself would need to be timed to take advantage of weather conditions and Chinese patrol schedules. Sarah spent the next hour discussing specific aspects of mission planning with General Coleman. They covered everything from team selection and training requirements to equipment development and international legal considerations. The complexity of the operation was staggering, but Sarah felt confident that it could be executed successfully with proper preparation. As their discussion concluded, General Coleman made a surprising observation. You know, Lieutenant Commander, when you first joined the Navy, I doubt you imagined you'd one day be planning operations at this level of strategic importance. Your career trajectory has been remarkable. Sarah smiled slightly, thinking about her journey from a small town in Alaska to the Pentagon's most classified planning sessions. No, ma'am, I certainly didn't anticipate anything like this. But I've learned that the Navy has a way of providing opportunities for those willing to take on challenges that others might avoid. That's exactly the attitude that brought you to my attention, General Coleman said as they prepared to leave the conference room. The willingness to volunteer for the impossible missions, combined with the skills to execute them successfully. That combination is rare, even in the special operations community. As Sarah left the Pentagon that evening, she reflected on how dramatically her role had evolved over the past year. What had begun as a routine underwater intelligence mission had led to briefings at the highest levels of government and now potential command of a mission that could influence the strategic balance between superpowers. The weight of responsibility was significant, but Sarah felt ready for the challenge. Her training, experience, and natural abilities had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. Moreover, She understood that the mission's success could prevent conflicts that might otherwise cost thousands of lives and reshape global security relationships. The next phase of her career would require not just tactical excellence, but also strategic thinking and leadership skills that went beyond traditional special operations training. Sarah knew she would need to assemble and train a team capable of executing one of the most challenging underwater missions ever attempted, while also managing the broader strategic and political implications of their actions. As she boarded her flight back to Norfolk, Sarah began mentally preparing for the months of intensive planning and preparation that lay ahead. The mission to disable the Chinese underwater installation would test every aspect of her capabilities, but she was determined to succeed. The war room at the Pacific Fleet headquarters buzzed with tension as Sarah entered, carrying the mission success reports that would reshape naval strategy for the next decade. 3 months of intensive preparation had culminated in the successful destruction of the Chinese underwater installation, but the celebration would have to wait. The mission's success had triggered a series of events that now required immediate strategic decisions at the highest levels of military command. Sarah's team had exceeded all expectations during the underwater demolition operation. Working at depths that pushed human endurance to its limits, they had not only disabled the installation's power and communication systems, but had also recovered crucial intelligence about Chinese quantum communication research. The recovered data revealed that the Chinese had been much closer to operational deployment than anyone had imagined, making the mission's success even more critical to American strategic interests. Admiral Harrison stood at the head of the briefing table, surrounded by more military brass than Sarah had ever seen in one room. The Pacific Fleet commander, Admiral Rebecca Thompson, sat to his right, while representatives from the Joint Chiefs of Staff occupied the remaining seats. Several civilian intelligence officials completed the group, their presence indicating the national security implications of the mission results. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Harrison began, "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's operation has produced intelligence that fundamentally changes our understanding of Chinese naval capabilities. The data her team recovered indicates that we were approximately 6 weeks away from facing operational quantum communication systems on Chinese submarines. Her mission may have prevented a dramatic shift in Pacific naval balance." Sarah felt a familiar mix of pride and humility as the room's attention focused on her achievements. The mission had been extraordinarily difficult, requiring her team to operate for over 8 hours at depths exceeding 400 feet while conducting precision demolition work under constant threat of detection. 3 of her team members had suffered decompression injuries during the ascent, though all had recovered fully. The intelligence haul from the mission was staggering. Along with the quantum communication research data, Sarah's team had recovered detailed plans for an entire network of underwater installations throughout the South China Sea. The Chinese had apparently been planning a comprehensive underwater infrastructure that would have given them unprecedented control over one of the world's most important shipping lanes. Dr. Elizabeth Foster, the Navy's chief intelligence analyst, stood to present the technical findings from the recovered data. The quantum communication system was based on principles that our best scientists thought were still theoretical. The Chinese had solved fundamental problems in maintaining quantum entanglement in underwater environments that we didn't even know existed. If deployed, this technology would have made their submarines virtually impossible to track or intercept. The briefing revealed that the Chinese installation had been the center of a research network involving universities, private companies, and military facilities across China. The quantum communication project had received massive government funding and had been designated as critical to China's long-term military strategy. Destroying the installation had not only eliminated the immediate threat, but had also disrupted years of research and development. Admiral Thompson took over the briefing to discuss the broader strategic implications. The Chinese response to the installation's destruction has been swift and aggressive. They've deployed additional submarines throughout the Pacific and have begun construction of new facilities in more defensible locations. We're now in a technological arms race that will define naval warfare for the next generation. Sarah listened intently as the discussion turned to future operations that might be required to maintain American technological advantages. The success of her mission had established underwater special operations as a critical capability for competing with peer adversaries. Plans were already being developed for similar operations against other Chinese facilities and potentially against installations being built by allied nations that might acquire the quantum communication technology. The conversation was interrupted by an aide who entered the room and whispered something to Admiral Harrison. The Admiral's expression grew serious as he listened, and he immediately called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just received word that the Chinese have requested an emergency meeting at the United Nations Security Council. They're apparently planning to accuse the United States of conducting illegal underwater warfare operations. This could escalate into a major diplomatic crisis." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. While the underwater installation had been located in international waters, the Chinese could argue that the attack constituted an act of war. The recovered intelligence would provide strong justification for the operation, but revealing the details might compromise other ongoing intelligence efforts. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being asked for input on diplomatic and political matters that went far beyond her military expertise. Admiral Thompson asked her directly about evidence that might link the operation to American forces. "We were extremely careful about operational security," Sarah replied. "The demolition was designed to appear like an industrial accident rather than a military attack. All equipment used during the mission was either destroyed or recovered. I don't believe there's physical evidence that could definitively prove American involvement." However, Sarah also acknowledged that the sophistication of the operation would make it obvious to Chinese investigators that it had been conducted by a highly trained military team with advanced equipment. The precision of the demolition and the intelligence gathering that had clearly preceded it would point to a major power as the responsible party. The discussion continued for hours as military leaders and intelligence officials debated response options. Some argued for complete denial of involvement, while others suggested that acknowledging the operation might actually strengthen America's deterrent capability. The decision would ultimately be made at the White House, but the military's recommendation would carry significant weight. As the formal briefing concluded, several senior officers approached Sarah individually to discuss specific aspects of the mission. The success had clearly established her as one of the Navy's premier special operations leaders, and there was already discussion of promotion and assignment to more senior positions. Admiral Harrison asked Sarah to remain after the others had left. When they were alone in the war room, he turned to her with an expression that combined pride and concern. "Sarah, what you've accomplished over the past year has been extraordinary by any measure. Your submarine intelligence mission prevented a technological surprise that could have changed the course of naval warfare. Your leadership of the installation destruction operation has preserved American strategic advantages that might otherwise have been lost. You've become one of the most valuable officers in the Navy." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but sensed that Admiral Harrison had more to say. She waited patiently as he gathered his thoughts. "The problem is that your success has made you almost too valuable to risk on future operations. The knowledge you possess about Chinese underwater capabilities, combined with your operational expertise, makes you a strategic asset that we can't afford to lose. I'm recommending you for assignment to the Pentagon, where you can help plan and oversee similar operations conducted by others." The prospect of leaving operational duties for a planning role was both flattering and disappointing for Sarah. She had always been most comfortable in the water, executing missions rather than planning them from conference rooms. However, she understood the logic of the Admiral's recommendation and the broader needs of national security. "Admiral, I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me, but I want you to know that I'd prefer to remain in an operational role. The planning and strategic aspects are important, but my greatest contribution has always been in executing the missions that others design." Admiral Harrison smiled slightly, seeming to have expected this response. "I understand your preference, and it's exactly what I would expect from someone with your background. However, The reality is that the Navy needs your expertise at a strategic level. The Chinese won't stop developing underwater warfare capabilities just because we've delayed them. We need to stay ahead of their technological advances, and that requires having our best people in planning and oversight roles. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from the Pentagon. The Chinese had indeed brought their allegations to the United Nations Security Council, and they were demanding an international investigation into what they called unprovoked aggression against peaceful research facilities. The American ambassador was requesting immediate military input on response options. As Sarah prepared to leave the Pacific Fleet headquarters, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed over the past year. What had begun as a single submarine mission had evolved into a central role in the technological competition between superpowers. Her actions had influenced strategic decisions at the highest levels of government and had potentially prevented conflicts that could have cost thousands of lives. The flight to Washington would give Sarah time to prepare for what would likely be weeks of classified briefings, congressional testimony, and strategic planning sessions. Her unique combination of operational experience and technical expertise had made her an essential contributor to national security planning, even though it meant leaving behind the underwater operations that had defined her career. As the aircraft lifted off from the Pacific Fleet base, Sarah looked down at the harbor where submarines and surface vessels prepared for missions that would continue the technological competition she had helped to shape. The war room discussions and Pentagon briefings were important, but the real work would continue to be done by operators who risked their lives in the dark waters where strategic advantages were won and lost. The mission's success had proven that American special operations capabilities could compete effectively against the most advanced technological threats. However, Sarah understood that this was just the beginning of a longer competition that would require sustained innovation, training, and operational excellence. Her role in that competition was evolving, but her commitment to maintaining American strategic advantages remained absolute. 6 months later, Sarah found herself back in the Pentagon War Room, but this time she occupied a different chair at the table. Her promotion to commander had come with assignment as the Navy's chief underwater operations planner, responsible for developing strategies to counter emerging underwater threats worldwide. The young SEAL from Alaska had become one of the military's leading experts on underwater warfare, her operational success having opened doors to strategic influence she had never imagined. The technological arms race continued, with new challenges emerging from China, Russia, and other nations developing advanced submarine capabilities. However, Sarah's contributions had given the United States crucial advantages in understanding and countering these threats. Her journey from small-town diver to strategic planner demonstrated how individual excellence and courage could influence the course of international competition and help preserve national security in an increasingly complex world.